Yes. Rare. Okay. So that was from a movie called The Message, which was made by, I guess, a Muslim director or written by a Muslim. So it's about the history of Islam. So if you ever want to sit down and watch a movie about the history of Islam, there you go. And this was a portion about the Hijra. I said they went to Medina, yes, the city of Nathrib, which that's name changed. But also one of the suggestions, well, not one of the suggestions, but one of the things that Muhammad did do is send followers to Ethiopia, Abyssinia, as they're called in the old language. So you had some Muslims actually emigrated to the kingdom of Ethiopia, which was a Christian kingdom at the time. That's why they're talking. He's a Christian king, and they're talking about the enemies of the Muslim group are trying to get them sent back as slaves, and so he's interviewing them. So Jesus comes up and stuff like that. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Gives us some idea of Muslim belief about Christianity. Um, I noticed they were kind of selective in which portions of the Quran they did want to quote about Jesus. Their enemies were a little bit accurate about what they believed about Jesus, which probably would have pissed the Negus, as he's called. The Ethiopian king was called the Negus. Probably would have gotten them into trouble if they actually said what they really believed about Jesus to the Negus. But nevertheless, it ends well for the Muslim emigrants, and they're allowed to live in the kingdom of Abyssinia for a while. Okay, we're talking about the caliphs. There she is. And I ended with Ali. Where am I? Yeah, that's Ali. Yeah. One of those weeks. Please remember we don't have class on Thursday. It's our holiday. Yes. Some people thought it was today, but it's not. It's Thursday. So hopefully they'll watch this video later and realize they made a mistake. So Ali, so we come to the fourth caliph or successor to Muhammad. So Ali finally gets his due. He is elected as the caliph of the Ummah. As I told you, he was Muhammad's nearest living male relative. He was a cousin. He was also Muhammad's son-in-law. He was well respected by Muhammad. He was one of 10 people to whom Muhammad promised a place in heaven. He was called Haidar the Lion, so Ali the Lion. That was his nickname because he was very courageous in battle on behalf of Islam. And even though he had not been chosen the first 3 times, he did serve as an advisor to Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. And after Uthman was killed, assassinated, Ali was named Caliph. And then all hell broke loose. We have the second civil war. Remember, the first civil war was when Muhammad died and a bunch of tribes decided to leave the Ummah to go back to their old ways. But now we have a second civil war because there are other people who thought that Ali was complicit in Uthman's death. He kind of winked at it. There he is. And so they did not like Ali. They thought he was a murderer and should not be caliph. So he had rivals, other people claiming to be the legitimate caliph as well. And so there were battles against his rivals. And this was a problematic period. The famous in 656, you have what's called the famous Battle of the Camel, where even, as I told you, Aisha was Muhammad's favorite wife, one of his favorite wives, but the most favorite of his favorite wives, I guess. Aisha was opposed to Ali. She was an opponent of Ali. So you have Muhammad, the prophet's wife, saying, I don't want you as caliph either. So problems. And they had the Battle of the Camel. It's called that because Aisha was riding on a camel, leading the battle. She wasn't leading it, but she was within the battle. Okay? And people could see her seated up on top of a camel fighting against Ali. And she didn't get killed. She got, I think, shot with an arrow. She got wounded, and they took her away. And then eventually they they squirreled her away somewhere for the rest of her life, so I guess she couldn't cause any more trouble. But nevertheless, imagine this scene of the wife, one of the wives, the wife most loved by the prophet, on top of this camel on the opposite side, the enemy side to the caliph of the community. Not good. All right, so Ali reversed all of Uthman's policies. Remember, Uthman was a nepotist, so he put a lot of his family members into positions of power in the empire. And that, of course, angered those in charge of administering the empire. Think of Doge that are firing people who might be incompetent, I don't know, from government jobs. Well, that doesn't go over well with the government people, and you need them to administer stuff. Ali had the same problem. He's firing people that he didn't think were good people to be in power. Well, you need these people to administer the empire, so there was a lot of bad blood there. And the people that Ali chose to put into power in their place, they were incompetent. They didn't really do a very good job, so that just made the whole situation worse. He moved the capital of the empire up to Iraq from the Arabian Peninsula. The locus of power, the place of power was here, but he moved it up here to Iraq. I guess to Baghdad. I guess it would be in Baghdad. But anyway, nevertheless, to this area. So, that kind of shifted power, I guess, away from the Arab communities in Arabia, and they didn't like that, I guess. But anyways. Everyone agrees that Ali was a believer. He was a devout Muslim. But I guess the criticism that scholars and people might make of him was that he was a utopian. He was looking for the perfect rather than the pragmatic. He wasn't a pragmatist. He wanted everything to be perfect in the empire, a purely religious Islamic state. And during one of the battles against Ali, he was forced into arbitration. The soldiers hung copies of the Quran on their spears and held it up, which was a sign of arbitration. Let's lay the book of the Quran down in front of us, and through God's word, we will negotiate something. So let's arbitrate, basically, and not kill each other. And Ali agreed to that, which also led to him getting killed because his army, the members of his army, were fanatics. And, these were rebels against in their eyes, rebels against the legitimate Khalifa, the successor of Muhammad. So they were like apostates or heretics or whatever. They were not Muslims, really. So they should just all be killed mercilessly. I shouldn't say mercilessly. That's too strong a word. But they should all be killed. You shouldn't arbitrate with them. And so the fanatics within Ali's army turned on Ali. And while Ali was one time in the mosque, the religious place, praying to God, one of these fanatics, they're called the Kharijites, group called the Kharijites. I think they still exist in one way, shape, or form. I was reading about them recently. I think they do still exist. Maybe in Oman, I think, the country of Oman. Their form of Islam is, I think, descended from the Kharijite. But anyways, I could be wrong about that. But anyways, I have to look it up again. Nevertheless, they were called the Kharijites, but these fanatical groups within his army, one of them went into the mosque while he was praying and, killed him, assassinated him. So that's the end of Ali. Because they didn't want him to negotiate. So you can kind of see that, and after Ali, that's pretty much the end of it. There are no other caliphs per se like them after this period of time. Different, the empire starts to split up in various regions. So you have different caliphs, you could say, ruling different areas of the Islamic Empire, okay? But yeah, the caliphate is kind of seen to have ended in a certain way with the death of Ali. And since then, there's been desire to restore it. It's a big issue for Shiite Muslims, which we'll talk about later, probably not today, but in the next week probably. For Shiites, I don't think it's such a big idea for Sunnis, although there have been attempts. Remember ISIL or ISIS, as it's also called? Maybe you remember this from a few years ago during, not during Biden, but this is during Obama. No. Yeah, was this during Obama had to deal with this? Yeah, I think it started, or did it start with Bush? No, I think it started during the Obama administration. The Islamic State of Iraq. Remember the capital was moved to Iraq, and the Levant, as it was originally called. This area, the Eastern Mediterranean, is sometimes called the Levant. So originally they were known as ISIL, but then somewhere along the way, the media, I don't know how or why they decided this, to call it the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, so it became ISIS. All right, whatever. And they invaded large portions of northern Iraq. They took over portions of Syria, which helped start the civil war in Syria that lasted for the last, almost 20 years, I guess, until it recently ended. Where else did they go? It was mainly here. And they were trying to reestablish the caliphate. Again, they were trying to establish the caliph after Ali, and they did, in fact, appoint some dude as the caliphate. I don't remember his name. I think his name's Baghdadi, something Baghdadi. But he's dead now. How'd that go for them? It didn't go very well. They didn't last it very long. But for a period of time, man, they took over large portions of the Middle East. But now they still exist, but they're much smaller and really have no power anymore. But yeah, that idea, and they were Sunni. I don't think they were Shiite either. So they were Sunni Muslims who wanted the caliphate restored and the Muslim empire. Okay, so we did Ali. There we go. All righty. The message. So we talked about the prophet. The prophet. Now we're talking about the message. You with me, Ms. Moore? You still with me? You got that a little... God bless you, Ms. Moore. The message, the Quran, comes from the Arabic verb qara, which means to recite or to read, and has the extended meaning of to explain or study something. Qara. So literally, the Quran means the recitation in English. So the recitation. I guess you could also say the reading. I think recitation is probably better. And there's your definition. The one scripture of Islam containing God's final and perfect revelation to Muhammad. Yes, and that's exactly what it is. It's not really a book of stories or anything. Like when you read like the Jewish scriptures or the Christian scriptures, more the Old Testament, what I'll call the Old Testament, the Tanakh of the Jews, filled with stories, all sorts of stories, a lot of stories. Not so much in the Christian scriptures. Stories about Jesus, but a lot of it's letters and stuff like that, which don't tell any stories. And the Quran is kind of like that. It doesn't really tell any stories. It's more the revelations that have been given to Muhammad by God. So it's basically God speaking from beginning to end, Do this, don't do that. I did this, I did that, talking about stuff. So it's a series of revelations. It begins, according to the traditional account, in 610 AD with Laylat al-Qadr, the Night of Power, in the cave where Angel Gabriel reveals or tells Muhammad to recite what he sees. And it goes until Muhammad's death in 632. Okay? All right. We already read this, but, this is considered the first revelation that Muhammad saw, the clot of blood, okay? Chapter 95 or 96, in the Quran. And the first word that, Muhammad receives is he's told to recite. Qara, he's given Iqra. He's told to recite what he sees. And so Muslims believe that the Quran is the perfect revelation. Perfect because it's made immediately by God and comes directly from God. Okay? The angel Gabriel doesn't tell Muhammad to write what he tells him. It's not a revelation in that sense. It is Muhammad is seeing what God has already written. It's God's writing by God himself. So it kind of ups the ante over even the Bible. Although you do see that some Orthodox Jews believe that about the Torah, that the Torah was written by God and then just given to Moses, written by God in Hebrew and then literally just given to Moses. Well, actually, I should say given to Moses. So you do find a similar idea in Judaism, okay? But this is another level. This is like God actually wrote every syllable of the Quran. So it's absolutely perfect, like God is, because it's immediately coming from him. So the written Quran, the book that we have, the written Quran, whether in Arabic or something else, is merely a copy of the divinely created pattern or prototype that exists in the presence of God in heaven with Allah. In heaven with Allah. Written in Arabic, classical Arabic. So that's the language God speaks, apparently. And for some Jews, it's Hebrew. Again, you see this in other religions, these sacred languages, Sanskrit. Are you guiding in the planes to the airport, or is that? Just kidding. Carved on a stone tablet. God carved the whole Quran is carved into a stone tablet by God in heaven. That tablet is called the mother of the book. Al-Kitab. Means mother, Kitab means book. So the mother of the book. And if you want any proof of this, the Quran even says this, which I know is I know some of you philosophy majors. Is anyone majoring in philosophy? I would advise it, at least as a minor, do a minor in philosophy. Do they offer a minor in philosophy here at Grin and Mercy? They do a minor? Does anyone know? I would recommend it because it helps you think. Do a major in what's going to make you money, but a minor in philosophy, especially if you're going to go into the medical profession or science and stuff, because a lot of scientists, they're great with data, but they don't know how to interpret well. They make all sorts of assumptions and they make illogical conclusions based on data. You have to know how to read the data, not just produce it. Anyways. So yeah, it's kind of a circular argument. The Quran is telling you this, okay? But nevertheless, it's kind of like the Quran is saying what a great book it is. It's like, surely this is a glorious recitation. Quran. Inscribed, carved on an imperishable tablet. A tablet that is unable of being destroyed. Okay, this little snippet comes from chapter 85 in the Quran. Right? So the glorious Quran carved on a tablet which cannot be destroyed. This is a reference to the Al-Kitab, the mother of the book. That in the presence of God, there is actually a big stone tablet carved in classical Arabic is the whole Quran. And this is what Muhammad sees. He sees parts of it every now and then when God chooses to reveal it to him. So he's not a creator of the Quran. He's not the author of the Quran. Religious studies scholars would say he's the author of the Quran. But Muslims would not say that. All Muhammad did was see and then recite what he saw, which comes directly from God. So there's no true translation of the Quran. If you do become a Muslim, you say the Shahada in front of witnesses and you say, I'm a professing Muslim, okay, you will have to learn classical Arabic because you can only really read the Quran in the original language that God wrote it in, which is ancient what we call classical Arabic, Arabic from the 7th century AD that Muhammad spoke. And you can read it, yes, you can read it in translations. I have a copy of the Quran in English at home. But there really is no true translation. It has to be studied in Arabic. Any translation is considered really just an interpretation of the classical Arabic. So no true translation. That's different from other religions. I mean, that's true of some other religions, but also different. Well, Sanskrit, when we learned about the Vedas and Hinduism, yeah, you have to learn Sanskrit. Remember, you read the article, I hope. Maybe you read the article about the boys becoming Brahmin priests in Hinduism. It's from the New York Times, well, some newspaper. Anyways, and you know, all they're doing in their like first few years of study, remember, is they're just memorizing Sanskrit, even if they don't understand it, and repeating it. That's all, because they have to learn it. They have to learn the proper intonation. It's not just even the writing it, but the proper intonation of how to sing it, how you pronounce every syllable, okay? Your breath. The same thing in Judaism. For Orthodox Jews, your children go to Hebrew school. They have to learn how to speak and read Hebrew because you're going to go back to Israel, speaking modern Hebrew in Israel, which is based on biblical Hebrew. No, they're teaching them ancient Hebrew so they can read the Torah and also read the Talmud, although the Talmud is really written a lot in Aramaic, but it's related to Hebrew. So they can read Torah and comment on it. They can't read translations. Christianity is different. Christianity's writings, you have the Jewish writings in Hebrew and parts of Aramaic. You have the Christian writings all in Greek. Yeah, I mean, those are the original languages, but you don't have to learn them, right? They don't make you learn them in Sunday school or a Catholic. They used to. If you went to Catholic university, you might have to definitely you'd have to take Latin, but they also might require you to take Greek, ancient Greek and stuff. No more, Mr. Whitehawk. Why would you need to know ancient Greek, Mr. Whitehawk? Or Latin. It's because almost all the medical terminology is based on it. Those two languages. Culture, legal culture, political culture is based on the ideas and assumptions of those civilizations. Anyways, no, my Bible's in English. I mean, yeah, I look at the Greek when I need to, when I want to get behind the translation and get at it. So, because as a scholar, I have to do that. But you don't need to, I wouldn't say, oh, you have to learn Greek in order to be a Christian. You have to learn the Hebrew to be a Christian and read the Bible. There she is. No, of course not. You can read it in translation, and it's still the Word of God. God is still, I believe it's still revealing through even English or Hindi or, Zulu, whatever language it is, Maya, Nahuatl. It's still the Word of God, but not in Islam or certain religions. Okay, so we see that kind of thread of idea. So portions of the revelation were made to Muhammad, who merely recited what he saw, and that resulted in the earthly written Quran that we have, which is believed to be a faithful, exact reproduction of the eternal Quran, which exists in the presence of God. Hopefully. Hopefully. I told you about the problem Uthman had, right? With the Quran and standardizing the Quran, and that kind of led to his death, one of the things that led to his death, because, whatever. He didn't like the fact that there were divergent Qurans floating around. So he burned them and just had a standard one. But the belief is that it's an absolutely faithful reproduction of the Al-Kitab. So it's not just a sacred book for Islam, it's the sacred book of all ages. Nothing for a Muslim or Muslima, nothing is comparable to the Quran. It is eternal, it is uncreated, and it is perfect like God. And this leads to an interesting theological question that Muslim theologians, Islamic theologians have discussed before. What is the status of the Quran? Is it uncreated? Is it divine like God? Is it God in a way? Because it's in the presence of God, surely. But, and so, different groups have different answers, No, the Quran is not uncreated. It is the perfect revelation of God, but comes from God. But it's not uncreated like God is. For others, it is. It is uncreated like God is. So it's still a kind of a debated question about the relationship of the Quran with God himself. But anyways, it's the essential basis for Muslim belief and practice. And so, go off of that. Okay. Okay. So if you have a Quran as a Muslim, you cannot treat it like any other book. You can only touch the Quran with your right hand. If you're reading it, for some reason, I guess culturally, the left hand is considered unclean or dirty or whatever. So you're turning pages with the Quran. You see someone in the mosque reciting from the Quran. You're going to be turning with his or her right hand. And you have to wash yourself, purify yourself with water before even touching the Quran. So you're ceremonially pure. If you are having the Quran in your home, it cannot be placed with any other book. If it is, you have to place it always on top of the other books, never with other books on top of it. It looks like it's just any human book. A lot of times people will enthrone, in a way, the Quran at the highest point in the room. They'll set it up above everybody's head in the room. No talking when it is read. When it is being recited, you listen in silence. And usually the book is wrapped in silk or some ornate cloth. All right. This is interesting. This picture here, I should do the video. Should have done the video. Should embed the video into the PowerPoint so I could just show it to you. Maybe that would be more interesting than just hearing me yak, right? This Winko. But this is interesting. It's a picture of a Quran, which is believed to be one of, if not the oldest copy of the Quran we have, which dates possibly from the time of Muhammad. Okay? It was found in the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. It just had this manuscript just lying there for like, I think 100 years or like a century. Got the manuscript from somewhere. Lying there. Nobody apparently thought anything of it. And someone who, yes, spoke classical Arabic. I always love these stories, just the right person in the right place at the right time. Someone, looked at it and was like, looking like, second, this is the Quran. Okay. And it looks really old. All right, so got somebody's interest, and they took it and they started doing testing on the parchment and stuff like that, and the ink and stuff like that. You want to make sure it's not a forgery. And they found out, wow, the parchment that this is on is like from the 6th century. It can go back as early as 568. Remember, Muhammad died in 632. It could also be as old as 645. So it could, but still, that's 15 some years, within 20 years after the death of Muhammad. You've got a print, someone copied the Quran out. That's still very good. And so what they found, they didn't find a complete, I don't think it was a complete Quran, but whatever. What I'm showing you here are chapters 18 and 20. I think maybe it's only chapters 18 and 20. I have to go back to my notes. Let me see if I put it in my notes. See if I added it at all. No, I don't see it. I mean, I have notes on my computer, but I guess I didn't put them in my notes. I'm just going on my memory, which is like, a plane flying on fumes. Sky Mazzola is like, oh, we got an engine out. Mayday, mayday. Anyways, so this might be from the time of Muhammad himself, but it's certainly very early. And it's not exactly the same as the Quran. See, that's part of the problem, is that Uthman missed a few Qurans. There are some manuscripts of the Quran that date from before the Caliphate of Uthman. And there are differences in the text of the text that was written down. So That's a theological issue. How do you, as an Islamic theologian, explain that God would say something at one time and say something in one copy of the Quran, but say something else in another copy? But we had that problem even during the time of Muhammad. We have stories from Muhammad where, people heard him say one thing at one time, because remember, he wasn't writing this down, he was reciting. And so one person would hear him say one thing, and another person thought, I thought I heard the prophet say it this way. And you might say, well, who cares? If you're basically saying the same thing, what's the difference? No, it matters because God is perfect, so God's not going to, or it kind of impugns or wounds the perfection of Muhammad's recitation. If Muhammad is not always perfectly reciting what he sees, how do you know what the Quran really says ultimately? And there's a story of a guy who's praying, and some other guy hears him praying, but not in the way that he learned from the prophet. So he takes him to Muhammad and says, recite what you just said. Say what you just said to the prophet, because that's not what I heard him say. So the guy, Muhammad says, okay, what did he recite? He says, oh yeah, that's what I said. And then he goes to the other guy and says, well, what did you hear me say? And the guy recites the prayer that he heard. And Muhammad said, oh yeah, that's right too. And that settled the matter. Okay, moving on. So what's in the Quran? Okay, we have some readings from the Quran. Hopefully you're going to do them, or you've done them already. What is basically the Quran? Well, it's in classical Arabic, as I said. It's rhymed couplets, a couplet or two verses. Okay, so it's kind of poetic. All right, it has poetry. It's kind of like Arabic poetry, rhymed Arabic poetry. The later chapters in the Quran are more prosaic and ordinary. They're not as poetic. Okay, maybe just Muhammad was running out of gas and was like, okay, let me just get the revelation out there and not try to make it into beautiful poetry. It's 144 or 114 chapters called surahs, or chapter. You can just say chapter, right? But usually it's called a surah. 114 of them, and they're organized from longest to shortest, except for the very first surah, which is very brief. Everything after that is from the longest. So that's one of the great things about reading the Quran, that as you get deeper into it, at least you know that you're going from shorter surah to shorter surah to shorter surah, okay? So you're getting, if it matters to you. Of course, if you're a believing Muslim, it doesn't, it's all good. But if you're a neutral like me, well, I'm not a neutral actually, but an outsider like me, it's nice to know that, okay, as you're getting from 114 down to 113, you're decreasing the size of the surah as you go. So organized from longest to shortest. They're named after the recurring word or theme, but as I told you before, that doesn't really always stick sometimes, because a lot of times the surahs go all over the place. They meander. And the best division that we can get, because there really is little to no historical information given in the Quran, so, we don't necessarily know when Muhammad received each one, but there are surahs that started in Mecca before the Hijra, and they usually are attributed to Mecca, the time of Muhammad in Mecca. And then when he moves to Yathrib or Medina, then he receives stuff in Medina, and those also have an inscription, this was given in Medina or Medina on the surah. Surahs that have no inscription, we don't know when he got them, who knows. So that's basically the time frame that we have for the giving of the revelations, from his time in Mecca before the Al-Hijra, and then after, when he was in the city of Medina. And apparently nothing after that. Just looking at my notes, I might want to skip over some things. Yeah, I might skip over this. It's interesting to me, but I'm not going to worry about it. The main message of the Quran, which is repeated over and over, It's not just that the Quran is a great book, it's the glorious Quran. There are a lot of statements to that. Who has given you such a great revelation as this revelation? It's repeated quite a bit. The Quran certainly boasts about itself and its greatness a lot. But the main message is the oneness of God. There is one God, repeated over and over again, hammered away at, and the prophethood of Muhammad. Don't doubt Muhammad. He's my prophet. He's my messenger that I'm sending to you. Okay. Just like, we find in, I guess, every other religion or human society, you might have a law book, but the law book has to be kind of interpreted. Usually the law books are not self-explanatory. So, yeah, you have a U.S. Constitution, but, you need the courts to kind of explain it and figure out, well, what did the founders mean in this? What did they mean? Or how should it be applied now when we have a different situation that the Constitution doesn't address? So that's just, in the secular world. So we see this in the religious world. We see interpretations. We see, we have Torah, but we also have Talmud. We have sacred scripture, but we also have sacred tradition, Christianity. And here in, Islam, we have the Quran, certainly, but then we have the Sunnah, what's called the Sunnah, which is custom or tradition. It's an Arabic word for tradition, custom, habit. So you see a kind of a different way that Islam looks at tradition than, say, Christianity. So we talked about sacred tradition in Christianity with Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and other Orthodox groups. It's not custom or habit. Remember, it's not, tradition is not that. It's the experience of Jesus that's been passed on in the Christian community, the teachings about Jesus and who he was. But the habits and customs can all change. I mean, you go to a Roman Catholic church, they would say, not now, but they would say their worship service in Latin. If you went to an Eastern Orthodox church, there would be an old church Slavonic, just old Bulgarian. And other churches, it might be Arabic and stuff like that. Now they all do it in the vernacular. You go to a Catholic church, it's in English here, Spanish, or whatever. And the same thing with like Eastern Orthodox churches. But you had sacred languages, and you had certain customs and habits. Priests used to dress a certain way, and nuns used to wear certain outfits and stuff. They don't necessarily do that anymore. And you could say they're all tradition, all right? But they change, and they're not really part of the religion in that sense. They can change, and they do change. But sacred tradition doesn't change. It's not the same thing in Islam. There's kind of a melding and a mixing between between like teachings that you have to believe, but also habits. So it matters if Muhammad wore a beard and didn't cut his facial hair. It matters in what particular way, when Muhammad prayed, he did pray. Did he turn his head to the right and to the left? Did he cup his hand behind his ear? How did he pray? How did he think women should dress? Should they be fully covered? Just have the head covered? Whatever. Which we might say, those are just cultural things, right? Those are customs that change, a society back in 7th century Arabia, okay, women dressed certain ways. So they have to keep dressing that way. Men wore beards. Do you have to keep always wearing a beard? The Sunnah, that's what regulates this. I mean, they really mean it's not just tradition. It's not just teachings, but it's also the habits. So a collection of the words, the actions, even the silent approval, the stuff that Muhammad kind of let people do but didn't say anything about. Okay, that's a dangerous one. That's like, okay, who judges that? Because it's silent anyways. That Muhammad and his companions, and by his companions it means the first Muslims, the first followers, especially the caliphs, And this functions as a source of Islamic life. Now, Islam is not different in this. You see this in Judaism. That's why, for example, you see this with the Haredim. I told you, are called ultra Orthodox, but they don't like to be called that. But the pious, not pious. Haredi means, no, that's Hasid. Hasid is pious. What does Haredi mean again? I forget. Anyways, if you remember the Haredim, who dress like they're from 17th century Lithuania. The men dress all in black with long black coats, big black hats, or they wear those big fur hats and stuff, which were cultural, in 1630, Lithuania, in the city of Vilnius, wouldn't have looked weird to anybody. People wore stuff like that. But they're still wearing it now in 2025. They have to wear it. To be a faithful follower of your group, also with the Hasidim, Seeds. Christians kind of have this with, the Amish, Quakers and the Amish, where they kind of lost their, they're not as hardcore as they used to. Jews are hardcore, source of life. But now, they put those little triangles on their carts, like needles as their kids. Some of them will use electricity, so London nights and stuff. But man, the old school, no electricity, no running water, no education for the kids. They're on the farm. You dress like it's 16th century Germany. The men, all you do is pants in the shirt, no buttons, because that's a modern innovation. Not that they have anything against buttons, I don't think. It's just a modern innovation. It's not how you dressed in, like Bavaria, 1611. So, you all have to wear beards. You all have to have your big hats. The women have to dress a certain way. And it looks weird, but it didn't look weird 300 years ago. So that's what you got going on in Islam. Now remember, a lot of these habits are from Arabia, right? From Arabian culture from hundreds of years ago. So it's, again, when you become a Muslim, it's not just that it's not just a belief system, you're entering into a whole other culture as well. So you'll see people who become Muslim, who have nothing to do with, they're not Arabs, could be Irish, Polish, Mexican, whatever. And they're dressing like someone from 7th century Arabia, because that's how Muhammad did it. And that's how we're supposed to do it, because the Sunnah tells us, the custom. So we have the Sunnat al-Nabi, which is, Sunnah is short for Sunnat al-Nabi. Did I put that in the PowerPoint? No, I guess I didn't. Which means the custom of the prophet. So it's an authoritative, it's a living commentary on the foundation of the Quran. Okay, so the Sunnah, these habits, are just as important as the Quran for living your daily Muslim life. Right? So you see this in the Quran itself in chapter 33 or Surah 33. Who would like to read this? Let's see. Go ahead, Ms. Ramnath.
Sure. Him who looks onto Allah at the last day.
Exactly. Can't make it any simpler than that. Look to the messenger of God for your example, especially if you're thinking about the afterlife, where you want to go especially. Do you want to go to paradise or do you want to go to hell? If you want to go to paradise, follow Muhammad. If you want to know, how do I live the Islamic life? How do I submit to God? Look to the example of his prophet, his messenger, who's Muhammad. So God tells you right there in the Quran what to do. Okay, so, if we're going to do that, then we need to know what the examples of the prophet were. And so people eventually collected stories about Muhammad and his companions on various issues and various questions. And these are called hadith. Hadith. Hadith is an Arabic word which simply means a story or a narrative, a story. And that's basically what they are, stories. So the hadith are the traditions, the accounts from authoritative sources of the words or actions of Muhammad that bind Muslims in their beliefs and their practices. Okay, so these stories. So when you're reading, and I'll show you an example of a hadith in a moment, but a hadith consists of the text, the source, and the authority of its transmission. Okay, so the example, the story from, let's say, Muhammad, but it also matters where it came from, which person, and how authoritative that person is, how reliable that person is as a witness. The hadith that come from Aisha, for example, I mentioned Aisha before, the favorite wife of Muhammad, very high in authority. Okay, so, you know, those are regarded very highly. She's a good source. So we're talking here about what's called the isnad in Arabic, the chain of transmission. Okay, what the story relies on or leans on. Sanada in Arabic means to lean on something, to prop it up. So what is the chain of authoritative transmission that's propping up this story? Is it a good one? Is it a strong isnad? Is it a weak isnad? Okay. A lot of hadith come from Aisha, I mentioned, and there's of course, an elaborate science that has developed within Islam for categorizing the hadith. There are, in fact, what are called the 6 reliable works of hadith. Okay, the 6 reliable works. So 6 different, separate groups of books compiled by different people of hadith. But out of those 6 works that are all reliable, 2 are considered the most reliable, and those are the collections by Muhammad al-Bukhari, who died in 870, Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, and the collection by Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj, who died just after Bukhari. And so Sahih means a collection. It's an Arabic word. A Sahih is a collection. So the collection of Bukhari, so Sahih al-Bukhari, and the collection with Muslim by Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj is simply called Sahih Muslim, the collection compiled by Muslim. And I said there are 4 others because of the 6 reliable works. But, really, these are the 2 best, considered the 2 go-to collections. Just like for Jews, you have Talmud Babli and Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Babylonian Talmud, the first one, is the one that, is really the go-to for the Jews in studying Talmud. Although you can look at Yerushalmi, but Babli is more authoritative. And here's an example from Bukhari. Would anyone like to read this example from Bukhari? Ms. Crumpton. Come on, Ms. Crumpton. Can you see it better if you come up close? Like if you want to come up and sit up here, it's, we can, doesn't work one way, it can work another way. Abu Huraira.
Be pleased with him, told the messenger of God, God bless him. Man saw a dog eating mud as a result of thirst. So that man took a shoe with water and had him pouring the word of the dog so it quenches thirst. So Allah approved of his and made him enter in.
Excellent. Okay, Ms. Carney. How about you read the second hadith?
Aisha, Allah be pleased with her, the mother of faithful believers, narrated, a child was brought to Allah's apostle, Allah's blessing and peace be upon him. The child urinated on the garment of the Prophet. The Prophet asked for water and poured it over the soiled goods.
Excellent. And who would like to read the last hadith? Who would like to read? Udenreither, come on. Come on, Udenreither. Wait a second. Wait a second. Is that your computer? Your laptop?
They just couldn't see it. So I can't see it.
But you have laptops right in front of you. Can't see it on your laptops in front of you. Why are you passing this?
She just
You're around from person to person.
She just don't know first.
Even though you got it on your computer, you're gonna read it from her computer.
Yeah, I was on my notes first.
Come on, Miss Hooken right there.
Oh. I don't know how to say that.
The last.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, take Miss Carney's computer and read it.
The Lord, Allah be pleased with those who read the Prophet, Allah's blessing and peace be upon him, said, cut the mustaches short and keep the beards.
Excellent. So, where's your beards, ladies? Does he specify it's just men? Yeah. Okay. I mean, women can grow beards, right? If they let it grow, do any waxing or anything, they can. So I don't know. Do Muslim women have to have short mustaches and beards? I'm assuming not. I don't see a lot of Muslim women with that. But nevertheless, it doesn't specify. All right, so here we got 3 hadith. Abu Huraira, I forget what his level of authority is. Maybe I put him in I put it in my notes. But I don't know if he's certainly not as high as Aisha. But we got one from Aisha here. So here we go with the isnad. So it tells us who's giving us to this. Someone named Abu Huraira, okay, told us that Muhammad saw a dog, had this situation. A dog was eating mud, it was thirsty. Okay, so it needed water. So the man took his shoe and gave the dog water. And so he went to heaven. Okay, so I mean, Muhammad doesn't say as much that you should do this. But I guess this would be his, what did I say? Silent approval. He's going to go to heaven. This is the prophet's silent approval. This is a good thing to do, to help out a creature that is suffering, not even a human creature, but another creature that is suffering, in this case, from thirst. And you have to remember, for Arab culture, and you see this also in Christianity and stuff like that in the Gospels with Jesus, dogs were considered unclean animals. So they weren't pets, they didn't. You might have a dog for protection purposes, but usually, dogs were unclean. You weren't loving your puppy or loving your dog, They were dirty animals. So a whole bunch of hadith deal with dogs and what to do. Like if you touch a dog before you pray, or when you're praying towards Mecca and a dog walks in front of you, you have to start over again, because dogs are unclean. So this is interesting that he's feeding, giving drink to this unclean animal. And that's a good thing. He'll go to heaven for that. So do good to other creatures. Aisha, high level of authority, the mother of the faithful, told this story. Little babies brought to Muhammad, and the baby pees on him. Which was more, babies are wont to do. Because babies they lack control, right, Mr. Whitehawk? Babies pee, babies poop, and in these cultures, back when they didn't have diapers, and babies were basically naked, they're going to pee and poop on you, so it pees on him, which makes him unclean. Oh, the baby peed on the prophet. But what's Muhammad's reaction? He just pours water on the place and washes it out. It's no big deal. You don't kill the kid because he peed on the prophet. So it gives you an idea of his character and the kind of character that a Muslim person should have, Kid does something wrong, you don't have to slap him across the face, You should know better. It's just a baby. And then Ibn Omar, I don't know what his level of authority is, I'd have to look it up, nevertheless tells us that cut your mustaches short, leave your mustaches short. So if you go to places like Turkey or other places in the world, you got these dudes with these immense mustaches and stuff. And they're Muslim, they say they're Muslim. You're not a good Muslim though. Remember that was like a thing, that was a fad about 10 years ago. Maybe some of your fathers were doing when they had the huge beards. guys had to have the huge beards and immense mustaches. Do you remember that at all? Or is that just me from 10, 15 years ago? Anyways. I mean, I had been wearing a beard for a long, long time, most of my life. And then all of a sudden it became a thing. You know, I hate that when something you're doing becomes a thing, and then everyone thinks you're doing it. Anyways, so keep the beard. So yeah, that's a question, you know. If you're a Muslim man, do you have to have a beard? No, I'll skip over this. This is from just an example I wanted to give you from Sahih Muslim to show you the difference in how Muslim decided to do his hadith than Bukhari. Another one from Abu Huraira. And 7 are those that will be given protection on the day of the Lord, the day of judgment, at the end of time. And just lists a group of good people, but not going to worry about that. All right, the pillars of faith. There are 5 things that every Muslim man and woman has to do. Okay, men and women are religious beings. God even says that in the Quran. Quran chapter 51, this is not on the PowerPoint, but I'll read it for you. Surah 51, I, God, created the jinn and mankind. The jinn are spirits of the desert, related to our word for genies. Kind of like an angel from Christianity or Judaism. So I, God, created the jinn and mankind only that they might worship me. I demand no livelihood of them. So doesn't want your money. Nor do I ask that they should feed me. I don't need food. All right. So it's referring kind of like to practices of pagan worship here, where you make offerings to the gods, feed them, stuff like that. But that's the only purpose of humankind, to worship God. Okay. So what about having a relationship with God? Well, I guess you want to have that too, but the essential thing is worship me. So so a Muslim has to do these 5 things, these 5 pillars of religion, as they're called in Arabic. The Arkan ad-Din is the Arabic phrase, the pillars of religion, but it's commonly translated in most books as the pillars of faith, the pillars of belief. The first one is, of course, belief that Islam is founded on the bedrock of the witness of faith, which is the Shahada, which I gave you at the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation. God bless you, sir. That's all right. Go ahead. Which is belief in God's oneness. The Shahada, the belief that there is no God but God, is more than just a statement of monotheism for Muslims. It's not just that there's one God, but God's complete oneness and unity. The belief that Allah is one. He's complete in absolute unity. God is not comparable to anything. He's entirely unique. So when you hear the phrase, the statement, a lot of times from Muslims, when they're excited, you'll hear the ejaculation, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Which is usually translated as... How is that usually translated into English when you hear Allahu Akbar? Well, you know what Allah means, right, Ms. Rayner? So what's that? God. Yeah, the God. God. I guess you don't know, Ms. Lane, what Akbar is, right? God is great. Yes? Ever heard that? God is great. Muslims crying out, Allahu Akbar. God is great. God is great. That's how it's usually translated in English. That's not literally what it means in Arabic, though. It means God is greater. It's the comparative. So what it really means is, it's kind of a corrupt statement in the sense, not corrupt bad, but it's not a completed statement. God is greater than anything is really what the false implication of the statement is. God is greater than anything. Anything. There's nothing greater than God. So it's not just God is great, but God is greater. Greater. Allahu Akbar. So there is none like him. He doesn't have children like a son. Wink, wink. I wonder what Muhammad had in mind there. He's not a human being, nor does he become one. Again, wink, wink, Ms. Callahan. I wonder who he has in mind there. God is, you get to believe, Tawheed. Yeah. All right, I give you the 5 things, but I'm going to go run through these 5 things, okay, in turn. So belief, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, pilgrimage, belief, okay? Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God, is the Arabic word. The concern for Tawheed. Right there in Surah 112. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Say, God is one, the eternal, everlasting God. He begot none, meaning he has no children, nor was he begotten. Oh, where did we hear that language before? Which religion did we hear? Maybe the Nicene Creed, right? The only begotten Son of God, right? None is equal to him. So there is no other God or gods. So Jesus, Holy Spirit, a Trinity, yes? Is that what we're getting at here? I think so. Because Muhammad specifies it. Remember, Muhammad, there were Jews and Christians living in Arabia at the time of Muhammad, and he apparently knew some. So he knew the beliefs, and he rejected them, okay? We find these in the Quran. Jesus is a prophet. Jesus is acknowledged. He knew Jesus was the Messiah, claimed to be the Messiah. Muhammad accepted that, a Christian belief. He accepted a lot of the story of Jesus. There's one event in the life of Jesus, that he does not accept. If anyone has done the readings for Islam, there's one event that will be celebrated this week during Holy Week that Muslims deny happened to Jesus. What is it? What is it, Miss Francis? Nope. No, Muslims believe that Jesus rose from the dead, was glorified by God. What do you think, Miss Hedgepeth? Oh, come on, Miss Hedgepeth. Throw me some little bone. Out of all the beliefs we know about Jesus of Nazareth, what do you think they would deny? Not the resurrection, no. Just what? They deny the birth of the prophet Muhammad? Well, you're on track there with something. What about Jesus and his birth? We learned this when we did Christianity. How was Jesus born? Miss Coyle. How was Jesus of Nazareth said to be born?
Mother of the Virgin.
Yeah, virgin birth, right? But no, Miss Coyle. I led you on that one. No, Muslims believe in the virgin birth too. Jesus was born miraculously of a virgin. What do they deny? What else do we have left? He worked miracles. They're not saying he didn't work miracles. Well, what couldn't happen? Because he was a great prophet, loved by God. What could God not allow it to happen? His
Crucifixion.
Yeah, the crucifixion, that. Muslims do not believe Jesus was actually killed on the cross. God saved him miraculously in some way. Okay, so shirk, sharing God's divinity with something else. That is the ultimate sin, the unforgivable sin in Islam. The worst thing you can do. Okay, not just worshiping idols like we saw in the movie. They're talking about one time you worship things of wood and stone and stuff like that. That's shirk, definitely. Idol worship. That's very bad. But anything that obscures the oneness of God or makes God like a human being, talking about God as if he has human attributes like a face or hands. Which, well, again, that can be a problem for the Quran, because if you read parts of the Quran, it talks about God sitting on a throne in heaven, which implies that God has hips and legs and a spinal column, because he's sitting. I mean, unless he's like a jelly belly or a big, he is a spaghetti. Sorry, Allah, don't kill me. But he's just like some kind of blob. But a man, it assumes that he's able to sit, and that why does he need a chair? What does he need a chair for to sit in? And I'm not making fun of this, and I'm not making this up. Islamic theologians have to deal with these things. These are questions. How do you explain that the Quran says that God sits in a chair without committing shirk, attributing something of a creaturely quality to God? Okay, who would like to read this from the Quran, from Surah 5? Who would like to read from Surah 5? Go ahead, Miss Francis.
Lo, Messiah, son of Mary. The Messiah said, O children of Israel, worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. Lo, whoever ascribes partners unto Allah, for him Allah has forbidden paradise. His abode is the fire. They surely disbelieve who say, Lo, Allah is the third of three, when there is no God save the one God. If they desist not from so saying, a painful judgment will fall on those of them who disbelieve.
Yes, okay. So here you go. And this is not the only statement, but this is, I think, one of the readings that I give you from the Quran. Some of them are a little bit longish, and I'm sorry for that, but there it is, it's whatever. Actually, no, number 5 is not long, it's near the end. Actually, no, it is long, it's near the beginning. Sorry, Surah 114 is not right. But yeah, it's clearly, I think, talking about Christians, okay? And they're called disbelievers. Anyone who says that God or Allah is Christ, the Son of Mary, okay, is a disbeliever. And they will go to hell, all right? Because you're ascribing a partner to God. You're saying that someone is equal to God. He has forbidden heaven from those people, paradise. They will go to hell. Their dwelling place is fire. Those who profess a Trinity, or say that they're, Allah, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So you have the first person of the Trinity, the second person of the Trinity. No, there's only one God in the unity. And those who won't stop saying this, they will have a painful doom. Which I have to go into the Arabic myself. There are places on the internet that you can actually do some study. You don't have to know Arabic, but you can study on the Quran, its language, for a dumbo like. So that's helpful too. Because I can't read Arabic. Maybe one of these days. It's an alphabet. All I have to do is learn the alphabet. But anyways, I haven't learned the alphabet. Anyway, if that's an accurate translation of painful doom, because doom basically means wiping out, to kill everything. You deserve to be killed. A painful death. But I'm going to assume in the context it's just another way of saying, you'll also go to hell. God will punish you because you deserve punishment. You've committed shirk. You have said something is like God that is not like God. That's wrong. It's not just untrue, it's wrong to do that to God. I'll end with this. If we want, there's no real creed for Islam like we have for Christianity. Christianity had a pretty set out creed from councils. Judaism also had the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides, which has kind of become a creed of sorts for Judaism, although Judaism has no official creed. Hinduism has no official creed at all, because it just doesn't. And so Islam does not have an official statement of belief or a creed, but there has been agreement on certain beliefs that Muslims must believe in to be truly orthodox, right-believing Muslims. And this is called the Al-Aqidah. which is Arabic for basically a creed, a statement of belief. Just like credo means creed or belief in Latin, and this is just the Arabic version of the word al-aqidah, the system of belief or creed. Don't worry about Abu Hanifa. That's the person it's usually attributed to, but don't worry. The basis of Tawheed, or the oneness of God, means I believe in these things. First, of course, Allah, God. Then that God created angels, spiritual beings, called angel. Then that God has given books of revelation to humanity. The Quran is the ultimate book, but remember I told you Muhammad accepted that God had sent prophets to the Jews and to the Christians. Jesus was a prophet. Moses was a prophet. So the things that were written down about them are also considered valid revelations and books sent to those people. The problem is that the Jews and the Christians have corrupted them. They've changed the words of Jesus. They made in the case of Christians, they made Jesus a man into a god. In the case of the Jews, they took the one God and made themselves his special people out of all the peoples of the world. Okay, that's the problem that he has. That God has sent prophets or messengers. That people will rise from the dead. Okay, there will be a day of judgment when the good and the bad will be risen in their bodies and judged. The good sent to paradise, the bad sent to hell. And then there's destiny, that God, kind of, you could say fate in a way. Okay, there's this element of fatalism in Islam. God is so perfect, he knows everything that's going to happen. And it's not just that he knows what's going to happen, he ordains that it should happen. So one of the examples, this might be an example, I don't know, it's not given in it might be in your textbook. But one of the examples is like if you light a match, it's not so much that you look at it as like, well, God created the world such that when certain chemicals are ignited, they consume oxygen and you have fire. Like we would know, say, from science. You know, you don't need God to be involved in that. In Islam, you do. It's not just that God wills the match to burn in his great wisdom of how he created the world, but he actually is making the match burn. So destiny. So good, evil, anything that happens is not just, it's not permitted by God, it's actually actively willed by God. So these are the 6 essential beliefs or creed that, you know, a true Muslim must believe. Part of belief. So I throw it in there. Okay. God bless you all. See you next week. Have a good holiday if you're celebrating. Happy Passover if you celebrate Passover. Happy Easter. I don't think there are any other celebrations, but you're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, ladies. Have a good day. Bye, Ms. Ramnath. Ms. Oler. God bless you.